and you mentioned qualified immunity. Can you explain that to our audience what that is?
Qualified immunity is a legal system that creates, in fact, a significant barrier for victims of police misconduct from being able to access justice through the court systems. It's become, again, another one of those hashtag terms like defund the police and police reform that we're hearing across the country. But in fact, it's yet another place where we've seen the laws show who they want to protect. And unfortunately, it's not Black and brown people. And so when we have a discussion about qualified immunity, it's about you talking about changing legal systems to make them more accessible for victims of police violence.
By the way, I'd like our audience to know that we did ask the head of the Boston Police Union for an interview for this program, but he never responded to our request. But Larry Calderon, head of the union, did tell GBH recently that establishing a new office merely creates a new bureaucracy. So anytime you add new layers of things, it just makes it much more difficult. Here's what he had to say.
They want to spend millions of taxpayer dollars creating it. It seems like it's about jobs and money.
And then referring to the ombudsman panel that currently exists, here's what he had to say.
If that panel's not being staffed, if that panel's not doing their job, then get a new panel and staff it and have them do their job.
So there's this whole issue of, bureaucracy. And the more that we talked, and we touched on this a little bit already, but the more that we're adding layers of panels or whatever it may be, that it just creates bureaucracy and it's not actually going after the problem. Milton, what is your sense of this?
Yeah, and to answer your earlier question too, I think part of the issue is these demands for reforms are not new, and they're the same demands. We're talking about police accountability teams, watchdog offices, and more accountability within the system. So when we talk about the Office of Transparency and Accountability, that is, one would argue, not a real office. It's limited in its power, it's limited in its scope, and part of the reason is because of the opposition from the police unions. They've always said, we can do it better, we can police ourselves, let's defer to our internal affairs office, but we've seen that's not working either. So I think the concern here is, yes, there is a panel there, but the reality is it's not working, and the numbers show it's not working. And part of that is because the opposition from the police union deferring to itself, we can handle this. And again, these are not new. These go back to the 1990s. There have been back to the Menino administration in Boston, there have been calls for a greater accountability office with more teeth, more power, more subpoena powers. This is a panel that we're talking about that doesn't have subpoena power over the police department. One could argue that's not a real panel. And I think part of the reason we're having this discussion again is because we've had it for so long and we haven't seen anything. And part of that is because the opposition from the union. So as we said, I think we want to see everyone come to the table and come to this resolution. And there's a frustration out there only because we're talking about issues that we've talked about before.
Right, and one of the frustration is voiced by Charlotte of Boston. She wants to know, who is holding up police reform legislation in the state?
The police unions. And they want to have a say and a stake and a seat at the table, and they've shown to have great political clout and muscle in the form of lobbying and campaign donations. Mm-hmm. And there's no denying that since June, since we've seen protesters take to the streets, we've seen a response from police unions at the State House. They're there with lobbyists. They have full-page ads in newspapers. They've taken to social media. It's a state their case, and it's a case that we can handle this. We've done this, and I think there's a reckoning that the community is demanding more at this point.
Dominique, another question. I want to address this one to you. Claudia of Medford, she's concerned about police officers who have been in trouble in the past, or certainly they have a record of certain kinds of actions out in the community, and they still remain on the job. Is this a bigger problem, perhaps? And if so, what can be done about these police officers who have this record of brutality in their communities?
One of the things that we sort of have been telling community members is that there is a bill, the Justice and Policing Act, that sort of covers this thinking about the national database, collecting a national database of folks who are officers who've had sort of officer-initiated activities, misconduct, all of those things. And that national registry will allow people to be able to know who is serving in their communities. And I think that You also just have to be informed about the policies of your local department. What is happening in your local department? What does the accountability procedures look like? Do you have an accountability board? And then how do you navigate those systems to make those complaints?
You know, I spoke recently with Cheryl Dorsey, a 20-year veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department. She details her experience on the force in her book, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate. She told us a compelling story about a culture of intimidation and more.
There was a white officer who I worked with when I was working Central Traffic Division. That's the division that's responsible for handling traffic accidents. And there was this one particular white officer who, well, I knew he had animus toward Blacks. And what would happen is when we respond to a radio call of a traffic collision, you get there and cars are in the middle of the intersection. And also during that time, there were a lot of Black men who were tow truck drivers who had scanners. And so they're listening to radio calls of traffic accidents, and they want to be the first one there to clear that intersection, because once they hook up a person's car, they would say, hey, I can take your car wherever you want. Well, this particular officer did not like the tow truck drivers showing up and trying to drum up work for themselves. And he would just pick at them and mess with them, and he'd run them to see if they had any warrants. And they were just there to help. Really, they were helping us by clearing out the intersection so that traffic could flow freely. And he wound up engaging this Black man at a gas station while he was getting gas. He wasn't even doing anything other than they had a history and they knew one another. What ultimately happened is the officer engaged him. He created a situation to use force on this man. He shot and killed him. And it was only then that LAPD decided, okay, so now we've got to do a punctuous pilot on this guy. He was ultimately fired. This officer was tried 3 different times for the murder of this Black man, and he was acquitted each time.
In addition, Cheryl believes officers can be held accountable in other ways. She thinks officers will think twice about their actions if their pocketbooks are hit and if they're held accountable.
I believe qualified immunity should be done away with, because it does give an officer great cover and shelter. If I know that if I go out tomorrow and kill someone, I'm not going to be held responsible financially. I think if every police officer, listen, we live paycheck to paycheck like everybody else. And if they understood that they could be held financially responsible, it would give an officer pause. As a patrol officer for 20 years, I can tell you, I am only concerned about the things that affect me every other Wednesday, and that's payday.